A Lesson Before Dying, Chapter 17. Between Monday, when I talked to Miss Emma, and Friday, when I visited Jefferson again, something had happened inside me, and I wasn't so angry anymore. Maybe it was the Christmas season and the children rehearsing their parts for the play, or maybe it was just me. I could never stay angry long over anything, but I could never believe in anything either, for very long. At the jail, I had to go through the usual search. Then, while the young deputy and I walked down the corridor to the cell block, I thought I would feel him out. Of the three of them at the jail, I figured he was the most likely to be honest with me. He was nearer my age, and he seemed better educated than the chief deputy or the sheriff. And I had heard from people in the quarter who knew his people that he had come from pretty good stock. "How's he doing?" I asked. "He's doing all right," the deputy said. "Well, does he ever eat the food we bring him?" "Some of it," the deputy said. "He leaves a lot of it, and we give it to the other prisoners, like she said. We've all eaten some of it. Good food, too." "How do the other prisoners treat him?" I asked. "They're just curious, that's all, but they don't bother him." "Do they ever talk to you about it?" "What, the execution?" "Yes. Sometimes they ask me things. I tell them I don't know a thing about it. I've never seen an execution." "Does he ever bring it up?" "No. I'm not sure he doesn't want to even think about it." "He must think about it," I said. "He must, because I know I do. I've seen myself walking to that chair more than once. I've woken up at night sweating. How do you take it? That's the question." "Well, I suppose every man wonders about death sometimes in his life." We came up to the landing just before the big door to the cell block, and the deputy stopped and looked at me. "Listen," he said, "we might as well call each other by our names. You're Grant, aren't you?" "Grant Wiggins," I said. "Paul Bonin," he said. And we shook hands. "Listen," he said, "I'm not going to get too close to him, okay?" "Well, sure. I've been warned. You don't get too close to somebody going to be executed. Be decent, treat him right, but that's all. This can get messy before it's over, and I will do my duty." "I feel the same way," I said. We looked at each other a moment, then we continued to the cell block. "What's a day like?" I asked Paul. "Well, he eats one hot meal a day and a sandwich. Lots of beans, cabbage, potatoes, rice, you know. Sometimes the sandwich is the first meal. 10 in the morning, 4 in the evening. He can come out once a week and spend an hour in the day room. Walk, sit-ups, run, anything he wants, and most times he walks or just sits there at the table. Once a week he gets a shower. We have another prisoner give him a haircut. He's had one since he's been here. The barber can shave him, but you can see his face doesn't need shaving. That's about it." "Does he talk at all to the other prisoners?" I asked. I never heard him. The deputy opened the heavy steel door to the cell block. Well, 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 if it ain't Mr. Rockefeller," one of the prisoners said, and he wore the green coveralls given to all the prisoners who did not have their own clothes. He also wore a red knit cap, his own. "Mr. Rockefeller always leaves you chicken and biscuits," he went on, "but no bread for the cigarettes." "Just cool it, Henry Martin," the deputy said. "You won't get chicken or biscuits either. You keep that up." "I hope you brought some Clarines," another prisoner said. "Anything," another one said. "This jailhouse food enough to kill a man." "Then don't eat it," Paul said to him. "What, and starve to death?" The prisoner laughed. And we came down to the last cell, Jefferson's cell, and Paul let me inside. "See you in a while," he said, and he locked the door. Jefferson sat on the bunk, slumped forward a little, his big hands clasped together down between his legs, and he was looking through the barred window toward the sycamore tree where several blackbirds were perched on a limb. "How's it going?" I said to him. He nodded his head, but he didn't turn to look at me. "I brought you some food." "I ain't hungry." "Well, you might get hungry later," I said, and set the large paper bag of food on the end of the bunk. "I was speaking to Paul, the deputy. He told me you always share with the other prisoners." "They want it, they can have it." I looked at his back, and then I went by him and stood under the window facing him. He was still gazing upward, and I noticed his eyes large and inflamed. Since my last visit, he had gotten a very close haircut, which exposed the structure of his almost triangular head. "Jefferson, we have to talk," I said. He continued looking above my head toward the barred window. "When your Nanan came back from seeing you the other day, she broke down crying." "Everybody cry," he said. "I cry." "Is that what you want? Her to come home crying every time she sees you?" He didn't answer. "You can keep her from crying," I said. "You can make it easier for her. You can do it, her that favor." He continued to look above my head toward the barred window. "She wants somebody to do something for her before she dies." "That's for I die," he said, lowering his eyes to look at me. He repeated it. "That's for I die." Is it asking too much, Jefferson, to show some concern for her? "'Cause I'm going to die anyway. That's what you're trying to say?" Now it was I who didn't answer. "That's what you trying to say, Mr. Teacher?" he asked. "We're all going to die, Jefferson. Tomorrow, Mr. Teacher, that's when you gonna die? Next week?" "I don't know when I'm going to die, Jefferson. Maybe tomorrow, maybe next week, maybe today. That's why I try to live as well as I can every day and not hurt people, especially people who love me, people who have done so much for me, people who have sacrificed for me. I don't want to hurt those people. I want to help those people as much as I can." "You can talk like that. You know you're going to walk out of here in an hour. I bet you wouldn't be talking like that if you knowed you was going to stay in here." "In here or out of here, Jefferson? What does it benefit you to hurt someone who loves you, who has done so much for you?" "I never asked to be born." "Neither did I said, "but here I am, and I'm trying to make the best of it." "Like coming here vexing me?" he asked. "Am I vexing you, Jefferson?" He grunted. "Just keep on vexing me," he said. "I bet you say something about that old yellow woman you go with." "Are you speaking of Vivian?" "Just keep on vexing me," he said. "If you're talking about Vivian, it's Vivian who keeps me coming here." "Keep on vexing me," he said. "See what I won't say. Just keep on vexing me." "Go on and say anything you want to say, Jefferson." "Keep on vexing me. Bet you I'll scream," he said. "So Guidry would come up here and tell me to get out? Is that it? Is that it, Jefferson?" I've been trying my best not to become angry again, but nothing I said was making a difference. He just sat there grinning at me. "Go on and scream, Jefferson. Go on and scream for Guidry if that's what you want." We looked at each other, and I could see in those big reddened eyes that he was not going to scream. He was full of anger. Who could blame him? But he was no fool. He needed me, and he wanted me here, if only to insult me. "Her old pussy ain't no good," he said, and my heart suddenly started pumping too fast. And I made a fist of my right hand, and if he had been standing, I would have hit him. If he had been any place else, I would have made him get up, and I would have hit him. I would have hit him at any other man for saying that. But I recognized his grin for what it was, the expression of the most heart-rendering pain I had ever seen on anyone's face. I rubbed my fist with my left hand, and gradually I began to relax. "That lady you spoke of, boy, cares a lot about you," I said to him. "She is waiting at that school right now for me to bring her news about you. That's a lady you spoke of, boy. That's a lady. Because it's she who keeps me coming here, not your Nannin, not my aunt, Vivian. If I didn't have Vivian, I wouldn't be this damn hole, because I know damn well I'm not doing any good for you or for any of the others. Do you hear what I'm saying to you? Do you?" I saw that grin slowly fade as he lowered his eyes toward the floor, and when he looked up again, I saw tears in those big reddened eyes. "Manners is for the livin'," he said. He looked at me a while, and then he swung around and knocked the bag of food off the bunk. The bag burst open on the floor, and there was fried chicken and biscuits and baked sweet potatoes all over the place. "Food for the livin', too," he said. And when the deputy came back to let me out, I had picked up all the food and put it back into the torn paper bag, and I had placed the bag on the small steel shelf by the washbowl. Jefferson and I had not exchanged a word for 15 minutes. He had lain down on the bunk facing the wall. I heard Paul coming down the block, speaking to the prisoners, calling them by their first names, threatening this one with hard work and praising another for being good. He looked at Jefferson as he let me out of the cell. Jefferson lay with his back toward us. "How'd it go?" he asked. "Okay." He went down the cell block, and the prisoners asked me what I had brought Jefferson to eat. I didn't answer. And just before we reached the heavy metal door, Henry Martin yelled out to me, "Goodbye, Mr. Rockefeller. I'll be here when you come back." "That's for sure," Paul said to him. He opened the steel door, and we went out. "Sheriff wants to see you in his office," Paul said. "Something the matter?" The deputy shrugged his shoulders. "He just told me that he wanted to see you before you left." The sheriff was talking on the telephone when Paul and I came into his office. The chief deputy was talking to a fat man who I had seen at Pickett's house. The sheriff sat back in his chair and his cowboy boots propped on his desk, and he was talking to someone at the state prison in Angola. The chief deputy and the fat man were talking about fishing at Old River, and they continued their conversation for another 5 or 10 minutes as if I weren't even there. Paul stood beside me a while, and then he went into another office, and I stood waiting. The sheriff hung up the telephone and looked at me over the tips of his boots. "Well, Professor, you making any headway?" he asked. "I don't know," I said. "You've been seeing him a month. You still don't know if you're making any headway?" "No, sir." The chief deputy and the fat man had quit talking, and they were looking at me, too. "You wouldn't be trying to hide something now, would you?" the sheriff asked me. "No, sir." "Glad to hear it," he said. "Hear that, Frank? He ain't hiding nothing." The fat man grunted and looked at me, and Guidry drew his boots from the top of the desk and dropped his feet heavily to the floor. "Woman," he said, "always coming up with something new. Now you all want to meet in the bullpen, picnic-like." He looked at me as though I was supposed to know what he was talking about. "Well, what do you think?" he asked me, when I didn't offer an answer. "Well, that's up to you, Sheriff," I said. "Well, yeah, I know," he said, "but the things they come up with, they want to meet him in the day room or another comfortable room. A comfortable room where they can all sit down, because they can't all sit in that cell. You ever heard of anything like that before?" "I don't know what you're talking about, Sheriff," I said. "Oh, don't you, Professor?" "No, sir, I don't." He regarded me a while, and so did the chief deputy and the fat man, and the deputy was looking very mean. "You don't know they came up to my wife?" the sheriff asked me. "I don't know a thing that you're talking about, Sheriff." "Well, they came up to the house, and they said that they couldn't sit down, and could she please, ma'am, speak to me about arranging a place so that they can sit down. And you don't know anything about that?" "No, sir, I don't." "Are you playing with me, Professor?" the sheriff asked. "Sheriff, I don't know what you're talking about." I would learn later that Miss Emma, my aunt, and Reverend Ambrose had visited the sheriff's wife a day after they had last seen Jefferson. The sheriff's wife greeted them graciously and set a precedent by having them sit in the living room while her maid served them coffee. They talked about little things before they came to their purpose in coming there, and the sheriff's wife was stunned. She nearly spilled her coffee. What was wrong with the cell? Wasn't it big enough? Well, yes, but they couldn't all sit down. Was it necessary that they all sit down at the same time? Couldn't they take turns? She was sure that Reverend Ambrose didn't mind standing, and maybe Jefferson could stand up too, and let Tante Lou and Miss Emma sit down. It was then that Miss Emma reminded the sheriff's wife of all the things that she had done for the family over the years. The sheriff's wife was suddenly taken with a splitting headache. She wondered where the maid had gone to, but she didn't call for her. She frowned and rubbed her temples. She told Miss Emma that she would see what she could do. "But don't count on it," she said. "The sheriff makes up his own mind in these matters." "Just speak to him if you don't mind," Miss Emma said. "I done a lot for you and your family over all these years." "Oh, Lord, do I know," the sheriff's wife said. "Do I know, do I know, do I know. And I'll speak to the sheriff. Lord, I'll be glad when all this is over." Miss Emma dropped her cup of coffee on the floor and started calling on God. "Oh, I didn't mean it that way," the sheriff's wife said. "God in heaven, no, I didn't mean it that way. Lou, Reverend Ambrose, can't y'all do something? The Lord knows I didn't mean it that way." "Woman," the sheriff said to me, "always coming up with something new." And he looked at his deputy. "Well, Clark, what do you think?" Clark's eyes looked like marbles in his big face. "Let him stay where he's at." "My sentiments exactly," the sheriff said. "But if we put him in handcuffs and leg chains?" "I wouldn't even bother," Clark said. "I wouldn't either," the sheriff said. "But you got these women." "He ain't here for no picnic," Clark said. "He killed Mr. Grope. Let him stay right there in that last cell till that last day." "What do you say, Frank?" the sheriff asked the fat man. The fat man shrugged his shoulders. "I'm just standing here." "Well, I'll go to him, and I'll leave it up to him," the sheriff said to me. "If he wants to come to the day room in shackles, all right. If he wants to stay in his cell unshackled, all right. But cell or day room, if I notice any aggravation, I stop all visits. You see, I now know you haven't done a thing yet. Boys on the block tell me you haven't done a thing, and I doubt you ever will." I didn't answer him, but I was thinking, "Sheriff, you don't know how right you are." "You can take her this message," the sheriff said. "He can meet her in the day room if he wants, but he will be shackled. Every moment of the rest of his life, he's going to know he's in jail, and he's going to know to be here till the end. This ain't no school, and it ain't no picnic ground, all right?" "Yes, sir." "Good. I'll see you later, Professor."